Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I am Daniel Waktula, GIS professor in ACC. I am going to present a topic on transboundary rivers in the age of globalization and climate change with a specific reference to the rivers of Nile and Mekong Delta. At this point, I would like to appreciate the coordination, scheduling, and everything made by the international director of the ACC, William Jaden. I'm really honored to have this opportunity to make this presentation. And here we go. The presentation is dealing with the works of rivers. But when you talk about the works of rivers, we have a blue planet, which is going through changes coming from the interior of the Earth and from the exterior of the Earth. The interior of the Earth is forces like plate tectonics and volcanic mountains, which is creating mountains in the planet. On the other hand, the external forces, such as the rivers, are taking this extra material from the top of the surface and then carrying them miles and miles, thousands of miles into the ocean, trying to create the Earth as flat as possible. But these two forces has been with us for the last 4.5 billion years, and it will continue to operate the same way, constantly shaping our planet. So these rivers are just making like 1% in terms of area of the surface of the Earth, but they are doing great and tremendous job in shaping and molding the surface of the Earth. And they are everywhere, almost in every continent, which is ubiquitous except Antarctica. So they are doing a lot of work shaping the global landscape. And as you can see in the screen, they are collecting waters from a wider area and then bringing them to a few channels in the middle section. And then as it is approaching towards the ocean, towards the flat area, it is branching out. It looks exactly like the time glass, as we can see here, wider at the top, and then narrower at the middle, and then trying to get into, branched out into the flat area at the bottom side. So these rivers are sources of energy and sources of food for us, and then they have made a great contribution of human history, more than any politician has done in the past, more than any technology or road has done to this planet, because these rivers have played an important role in creating the initial form of government, city-states, around the place where this river civilization took place in the flood areas, in the flat areas. And also commerce, religion, politics, migration, all traced back to ancient civilization that has happened in the floodplains of rivers. So these rivers have a very strong attachment with us in terms of culture, in terms of art, in terms of literature. We can trace back to most of the famous writings and paintings related to these rivers. So these rivers are an important area where power has been structured, because a power or a group or an individual who has a strong control over the water can control the administration, can control the taxes. Therefore, many ancient civilizations have turned themselves into an empire, which we call them the hydraulic empire. So we can take examples like the Tigris and Euphrates River in the Mesopotamia area, the twin rivers. Or we can see Egypt in the Nile Delta area. Or we can see places like Indus River, Yellow River, as you can see on the map. They are places which we consider them as a very important, powerful hydraulic empires. And then these rivers, again, have played an important role in creating a seedbed for the emergence of academic debate, emergence of scientific studies. So the pursuit of knowledge has emerged in these places. Why? Because this is in the river area where the deposition is taking place. A fresh soil is coming from all over the upland areas, which is allowing people to cultivate almost 3 times a year, so that not everybody should be working on the land. a certain portion of the population should be engaged in other economic activities to be a thinker. That is why civilization has emerged. That's why these places have become very, very important. They created a chance for science to bloom. Not a pseudo, but the initial form of science and technology has started. Even the earliest legal code, which we call it the Namu Law Code, was discovered by archaeological studies somewhere in the Euphrates River. The Nilometer was the first scientific method of gathering data from the Nile flood so that people can calibrate that timing and then make a prediction when is the next flood is going to happen. All those scientific journeys have started in a place where these rivers have played a role in the past. These rivers are also serving as a boundary, which we call them blue boundaries. NASA, using a satellite technology, has tried to document how long is the total length of rivers in this world, only taking the widest rivers, like a minimum of 30 meters, because the Landsat was able to detect 30 meters of width of a river, which has been for a long time used in the US for the civilian purpose since 1972. According to this data, there are over 2 million kilometers if we add them all. If we add them all, they are bigger than the state of Texas. Okay, these rivers are creating boundaries for many parts of the world, country-wise. They make about 58,000 of kilometers, making a boundary, excluding the coastal areas. If we go down to the state level, the number jumps into over 180 million. When it comes to the county level, it will jump into 442,000 of kilometers. They play a role. These blue borders are very much advantageous. They are already there compared to the land survey, which is taking time, which is taking energy, which is taking money. These are neat boundaries, which is creating a very important contribution for administrative purposes. And that is why during World War I, Woodrow Wilson has created a small group of professionals from the discipline of geography, economics, history, and political science to study how we can minimize the probability of conflict between countries. And the conclusion they arrived at is using water as a natural boundary between nations. So he called this document the Black Book. By the time there was a negotiation in France by the name of Treaty of Versailles, he negotiated that some countries should be given this kind of access. For example, the present-day Iraq was supposed to get the whole area, be granted the headwaters of Tigris and Euphrates. Of course, this proposal was not approved, but many of his proposals were approved. And as we can see, many of these proposed borders considered access to rivers as a factor, sometimes transferring control to the favored countries. So whether we like it or not, as you can see, more than a quarter of the world inland boundaries were directly or indirectly influenced by the use of rivers as a boundary, in addition to language and some cultural factors. Okay, so these rivers are not only boundaries, they also cut through boundaries. They don't care about the line drawn by humans. So these rivers are shared by countries. There are over 200 rivers, which is shared currently by different countries, and this has to be managed in a very, very understandable way, because one can't control everything of the river while it is crossing the boundary, which is bringing in the necessity of negotiation, cooperation, treaties, accord, and etc. So sometimes a country which is found located in the upper side of the river wants to use this river as a source of power. There are other group of countries which are in the lowland area. which are using other forms of power in order to access more of water. So there is always a tension between the upstream countries and the downstream countries. So because of this, we have a new science of study by the name the hydropolitics, the study of the cooperation and the conflict among states who are sharing a transboundary rivers, which is a very complex topic. And this is exemplified by one incident. There is a river from the United States flowing all the way to Mexico, Rio Grande. About 500 kilometers is made as a boundary by this river. This river used to provide a very good water and soil for farmers in Mexico. But because of the new expansion of production in crop production in Colorado and New Mexico, what happened? The amount of water has declined and it has completely drying, especially during summertime. So the government of Mexico has complained to the US in 1895. What was the response? The response was very, very strange. At that time, the Attorney General, by the name Harmon, he responded that United States had no obligation to limit its domestic use of the Rio Grande. It has absolute sovereignty over the territory and therefore over any rivers flowing within the boundary. So this kind of saying is now known by the name the Harmon Doctrine. It was shocking, especially for more vulnerable countries who are in the downstream parts of the world. Of course, the United States has changed its mind, but this kind of sentiment has been shared by some governments in some parts of the world that they do have the absolute right in using and controlling rivers for their own benefit without any regard for countries in the downstream. But does it mean that countries which are in the downstream are always a victim, helpless? The answer is no. Why? Because there are some powerful nations which can wield their power over the upstream nations. Take an example of Czech. Unless Czech is getting permission from the government of Germany, it couldn't access through its own river down to the North Sea. The same is true for the Hungary. Hungary should get a permission from other countries such as Croatia, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Romania. The same is true for a landlocked Paraguay, which is located in a mountainous area which doesn't have any access to the ocean. But if it wants to get access to the Atlantic Ocean, the state of Argentina should provide them that kind of permission. Okay? So this leads us to one incident which I would like to share with you. We all know that Nelson Mandela has been very famous. He has been imprisoned in South Africa while he was fighting against the apartheid government. He has been a champion of justice, social justice and equality and respect for mankind. But what happened a few years after he became a first president after the apartheid? There was an incident in the neighboring country by the name Lesotho. What happens? Election has created some kind of chaos in the nation. So everything was messed up. What he did was nothing but sending his own army, invading that country, and then controlling the place where the sources of rivers are located, because there was a project of dam which is providing water to the heartland of South Africa. Big cities like Pretoria, Johannesburg, were meant to get that water from that place. So it is after controlling, killing certain number of people over there that they started to calm the riot in cities. This has happened in a very special moment when Mandela was ready to be awarded with the Congressional Gold Medal. What do we learn from here? No president, even Mandela, can defy the paramount importance of water security. So this is a very, very big problem when we are sharing river. It doesn't necessarily go smoothly and then go along with the principles. It is a very complicated issue. So why are we focusing on Nile and Mekong? They are continents apart. Nile is in Africa, Mekong is in Asia, very wide apart. Socioeconomically, they are different. And in terms of culture, they are different. The biophysical environment is different, but they share something in common. What? First of all, these two rivers are among now the leading in terms of news cycles and political debate that there is a contentious relationship among the countries which are within these basins. A second thing is that they are home to millions of people. Of course, in the Nile, it is over 250 million, but when it comes to the Mekong, it is about like 50 million, totally like more than 300 million. They share something in common that they have people who are low in terms of economy and also dominated by rural population. So these rivers play a huge strategic significance. Nile, because of its location, it is a target, it is attention, it gets the attention from the European countries, from British, from the US, from Italy, from German, because it has access to the Suez Canal, which is connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, which is making a shortcut. And the other thing is, it is a place where this Nile River is allowing the production of cotton, and then etc. All those things. This place has been used as a staging for World War I and World War II. The same is true for Mekong. It is a target, for instance, by the US government. When there was the Vietnam War, this Mekong River has played a major role. And currently, China is also playing a huge presence in that area, and then that has become also a very important strategic place for the global players. Because of that, both the Obama administration and the Trump administration have really tried to get involved in helping countries, especially in the lower course of Mekong, so that they can create some kind of challenge to the expansionist policy of Chinese government from the northern side. So this leads us to a very small satellite view of the two rivers. So if you look at this diagram, satellite image, you see it is a purely delta, and the river is coming from the south to the north, and this is the left side Giza, and Cairo is somewhere here at the start of the branching out. And as you can see, there is a Suez Canal which is connecting this Mediterranean Ocean to the Red Sea, so that the ships can go through this way. And in terms of the Mekong River, we see this beautiful satellite image when the river is branching out, and this place is Ho Chi Minh, a city in Vietnam. And satellite, by the way, helps to detect the rice field around here because the radar is strong enough to penetrate through a very thick cloud, which is mostly covering the Southeast Asian countries. And another image at night, this is like a very beautiful image, like a long-stemmed flower. As you can see, here is Cairo. And as you can see, this is Mediterranean Ocean. We see some clouds over here, but we don't see any traces of cloud in here because this is the Sahara Desert. And another image in here, this is Mekong serving as a boundary between Laos in the left and Thailand in the right side. As you can see, the color of water is brackish, which is indicating the amount of silt which is transported by this river. And the other thing what we can see is, we briefly mentioned about Suez Canal. This Suez Canal is connecting, you see, this Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea, and then to Asia. It is connecting Europe to Asia. London, England used to colonize many countries of the world, including the Arabian Peninsula. Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India were colonized. So instead of going all the way around here, this creation of this Suez Canal has made it very, very small. So people are saying that Nile River is the lifeblood of Egypt, whereas this canal is known as the umbilical cord to the world. They call it that way. So that's why this area has gotten very huge attention from many superpowers of the world. Many superpowers of the world During the Cold Era, both the US and Russians were interested on this part of the region. So if you look at the resource use in these two rivers, even though the Nile basin is very large, which is inhabited by more than 250 million people, the number of dams are very small, a ratio of 0.1 to every 10,000 kilometers square of an area, whereas in Mekong, we see like 55 dams for every 10,000. There is a huge construction. Despite the small number of population here, we have a high density, partly the role played by China, which we'll see later on. And the other thing what we can learn is that what are we expecting to get from this presentation? First, we are going to identify the biophysical resources vis-a-vis the topographic position, whether it is in the upstream or downstream. And then secondly, we are going to see what is the likely scenario of the changing land resources and the changing climatic resources. What does it look like? And then finally, we are going to compare the geopolitical landscape, which is going on in the two river basins. Okay? To do that, data has been collected from different sources, the GIS data shapefile. As you can see, the sources are indicated, digital elevation model, population data, and then bioclimatic variables such as the climate data for the future, not only for the present. When we say the future, in 5 timestamps, one is from 2021 to 2040, the second is 41 to 60, the third is 61 to 80, up to 2100. This kind of prediction is made by modelers, climate change modelers, and then I have used that data in order to see what is happening, what is going to happen in these two basins, okay, also soil data. So what do we learn from these two places? As you can see, Nile is the longest river in the world, followed by the Amazon. And it covers a huge area and accounting for 10% of the continent. And then the discharge, unfortunately, is very small amount of water. Why? Partly because it is passing through what? The huge desert around here. There is no supply of water for this part of the region. And then people call it that it is a gift of Nile. Whenever people are talking about Egypt, they are talking about Nile. It's synonymous. Why? Almost 97% of the Egyptian population lives in a very narrow strip of the Nile area. When it comes to the Mekong River, it is, of course, shorter compared to Nile. But in terms of discharge, you can see a comparison between 2,000 here and then 16,000. Why? There is a snow melt around here, in the Tibetan highland in China. And then there is a huge amount of rain happening, especially in the left side in the Thailand region in this part. So because of that, we have high. But the river is finally going into joining the China Sea here, and then people call this place the rice bowl of Asia because a huge production of rice is going on for a large population in this region. And then if we are looking at the positional analysis, the upland versus the lowland area, we see that if all things are equal, physical geography plays a role. If you are in the top, you are theoretically having a power. You can divert. If you are a bad guy, you can pollute that river. That is what theoretically says. But it doesn't necessarily mean that way. Physical geography doesn't necessarily be the only factor. Of course, it could be used for some bad purposes. Okay? So the problem is that sometimes those who are in the top are not powerful. So unfortunately, many people simply associate upland position as a powerful state. They take an example of China, they take example of USA. But there are many countries in the world who are not powerful and at the same time situated in the upland area. That's why in 2012, the US Intelligence Assessment said that they almost made a warning that this kind of rivers could be used as for terrorist objectives. It could be weaponized by diverting, by polluting, and etc. Okay, by cutting off this river. So if we look at the upland, are they always advantageous? Of course, they have very limited advantage in the upland area. Why? Because it is good to defend. if you are in the upland area. And then it is, especially in the tropical environment, it will be cooler environment, cooler atmospheric condition, which is livable. It could be also safe from tropical disease like malaria. And it could be also, if you are powerful, yes, you can have a strong arm on the river. But in terms of economy, are they really useful? Topographically, they are susceptible to hazard because of the strong inclination of the topography. They are vulnerable to this landslide, soil erosion, leading to shallow soil. And then also, mechanized farming is very difficult in a rugged topography. Mechanized farming requires somehow moderate or flat landscape. And mountain communities are increasingly marginalized because of lack of communication, transportation, which is very expensive to construct in those areas. Okay? So that is why the majority of global population are concentrated in areas which are lowland or very near to the ocean. Very high concentration are over the lowland areas. And if you look at the two river system, let's look at the Nile River. The upstream is in the south or in the southeast. Blue Nile or White Nile, this one. They meet here in Khartoum, capital city of Sudan. And then they go all the way to the capital city of Egypt, which is Cairo in here. It is going, the upstream is here in the south, and then it's going northward. But when it comes to the Mekong River, it is the reverse. As you can see, the upstream is here in China, in the Tibetan area, which was controlled in the 1950s by China. And then they do have now aggressive activity going on in this area. And downstream are countries like Thailand, Burma, Vietnam, and other which are in here, which is going the opposite direction. And if we are looking at the digital elevation model, which means the elevational differences, the more reddish this area is, the more mountainous it is. So where do we have them? Here in the source area, here and here. But the high elevation is around here. So the rest of them are yellow, which means more or less flat, which is good for agriculture, which is good for agricultural revolution and economic development. And the other thing what we can see is the inclination of angle. The analysis, the result of the analysis shows that it is very steep slopes are located here in this source area, which is flat in the rest, which is again very steep slope around here and then flat around here. So we see this kind of similarities and differences between them. So if we are looking at the longitudinal profile of these two rivers, well, as we know, Nile is very long, so it is traveling a long distance, but this is the Blue Nile only, the Blue Nile. So this is the Mekong River. As you can see, Mekong starts from a very mountainous position. Within a short distance, within 600 kilometers, it falls from 5,000 down to 1,500. It is very steep. But the Nile is not steep like this one, but gradually going, but traveling to a long distance. So where are the population in terms of this profile? It's very interesting. If you look at Mekong, only 0 to 2%, almost flat, that the majority of people are living in. But when it comes to Nile, people are settled not only in the flat area, they go all the way to the mountain steep angles like this one. So we see a contrast in the distribution of population in the two river basins. The other thing what you can see is where are population concentrated? It is very simple to understand from the Mekong because in the mountainous area, almost nobody lives here. Population is down here, attracted to this flat land. But when it comes to Nile, population is concentrated in the mouth of the river as well as in the head of the rivers. In both places, both ends of Nile is densely populated. And the other thing is the future for these two river basins promising? That is very, very big question because things are changing. We say that this planet is dynamic. Now let's look one factor. Is the population remaining the same? No, it is growing at a very faster pace. What does it mean? If population is growing, the demand is exponentially growing. New people need more land, more food, more hospital, etc. This is what? Adding pressure on the existing land. The land carrying capacity is getting less and less and less, and then finally leading to what? Vulnerability. Whenever climate is changing, whenever certain hazard is happening, what? One, the frequency will be very much higher, and two, the cost of that disaster will be too much, and the casualty will be extremely big. Now let's look at the evidence. What is the evidence? Let's look at the population. If we look at the population, look at this one. These are sample countries: Burundi, Zaire, Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia. So if we see 3 times, okay, for 2007, 2015, and 2020, population has been increasing almost in all countries. This is in the Nile. If we are looking in Mekong, the same is true. Population is, again, growing. Some places, in Vietnam, for instance, there is a steep. There is already high base of population, which is growing even much faster than the other. So what does it mean? The demand is increasing. We have to take into account this factor one. And then what about the supply? The supply means the land resource. If we look at the depth of the soil, it is rapidly declining. As you can see from this map prepared, you see the lighter the color, the shallower the soil. If the soil is shallow, it couldn't hold much water. It couldn't hold much soil nutrient. Therefore, whenever there is a dry spell, the crops are dying. That is a big problem. Food security is at stake in here. And the same is true here in the mountainous area. Of course, there is no one around here, so it wouldn't be much a problem in terms of land resources. When it comes to soil organic matter, one of the most important quality indicator of soil, which is making the soil fertile, is again getting lower and lower. Why? Because there is no input which is added to the land. We are simply taking out, but nothing to come in. Even the residue of crops and the cow dungs are used as a source of energy for households because there is no electrification. Because of that, this organic matter is declining, which means the soil fertility is getting less and less. That is, again, another danger we have in here. Now, what about the predicted temperature? What is going to happen in terms of the atmospheric processes? Would it be good or bad? Let's investigate. There was a model, as I showed you from the previous, in the method part. I have selected 5 sample locations, sample location 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For these 5 places, I have extracted data for the years 2021 to 40, this color, the blue color, and then 41 to 60, 61 to 80, and 81 to 2100. As you can see, in all the location temperature, the mean minimum of monthly temperature, I have chosen 2 months only. One for the winter time, December, and one for the summertime, June. Only for 2 months. As you can see in here, this one is for June. In June, the minimum temperature has been getting warmer and warmer. And then also for December, the minimum temperature is getting warmer and warmer. If the air is getting warmer and warmer, it will be a big problem because the atmosphere demands moisture from the soil. The soil is going to lose whatever moisture it has. This is really bad. The same is true for Mekong River. In Mekong, again, there is a warming trend, what we can see from this predicted models. What about the maximum temperature? Maximum temperature is also getting warmer. You see, both for the Nile in here, all location, and also for the Mekong River, it is getting. What does it mean? There will be more typhoons because the land will be much warmer. If the land is much warmer, it would be creating low pressure. Low pressure means like a magnet, which is attracting winds from the ocean. So which means when the wind comes in, it will bring in a lot of water in a short period of time, and this water is going to create floods, casualties. This is a huge problem. So what about the precipitation? Precipitation is not very clear as compared to the temperature, but we see a slight change. If precipitation is increased, maybe some people may think that it is good, but it could lead to flooding. That is one problem. If the precipitation is getting less, again, there will be water scarcity in the agricultural fields. So anyways, in both ends, the prediction is not good. It's not good. So this is happening also for the Mekong River. By the way, look, only location 1 has rain during December here, because it is outside of the monsoon region. In the monsoon in Southeast Asia, they get most of the rain during summertime, because the land gets much warmer, low pressure, and then the ocean is high pressure, so the winds are flowing from the ocean to the land. But they couldn't reach to this location. Okay? Now, this leads to that. Does it mean that Egypt is really going to disappear because of this change? Because Egypt has been talking about the danger it is facing, that it is, without Nile, it is going to disappear, and the future is not really good. So if we are investigating, there are some other countries like Saudi Arabia, like Australia, like United Arab Emirates. What do? Like Singapore. They desalinize the seawater, making it even much affordable. Making it much affordable, and they replenish some of the seas, taking from the Red Sea, for instance, carrying them to a very long distance. So if that is the case, if we do a small analysis, where do the population of Egypt live? We say that it is around the Nile River. This is the land use. The urban is around here. The rest of them is nothing. And then the population settlement, if we map them, the settlement is very much concentrated around this delta and this river. Okay? So if we use the geographic information system and then buffer the distance from the two seas, because this is adjacent to the Mediterranean Sea here and the Red Sea in here. If we have created a 300 kilometers of area, it would almost 97 of all the settlement, you see, from here to here is 300. And then from here to here is 300. So it is at the intersection of here. They do really have access. But the problem is they haven't diversified their energy sources. They try to capitalize on the Nile, and that really works. That really works. And what do they say? No Nile means no food, no state, no monuments, no pyramid. In short, there is no Egypt. Because of that, they are hinging on 3 doctrines. So first of all, we don't have any rain, therefore it is only line, so we have a primary need. Secondly, we have been using Nile for centuries, so we have to continue the same way. The third doctrine is that during the colonial time, we have some treaties which give us the privilege to control almost all amounts of the Nile River. Okay? So because of these things, any attempt by the upstream countries, including Ethiopia, to construct any dam or any use of the river or irrigation, they were very much strong in blocking any attempt to provide any, to get any kind of capital or expertise to do anything intervening on the Nile River. Okay? So they are still enjoying a lot of advantages. One, the hydropolitical advantage inherited from the earlier colonizer. It has been colonized by the British, and then they had that kind of privilege in the past, and they continue using that. Overwhelmingly military superiority compared to their neighboring countries. And then they are also do have a very strong diplomatic clout, which can impose on Ethiopia and other countries in the upstream, and they continue the political instability in the surrounding area is giving them a very good opportunity. If there is no instability, they even catalyze it. So they try to maintain those things as much as possible in order to use Nile only for themselves. Okay? So there is a terminology which is called the hegemon to mean a powerful state in the river course. When it comes to Nile, it is Egypt. It is shared by 11 countries, but Egypt is the most powerful nation. Okay? So, for instance, in 1979, the Egypt President Anwar Sadat said that the only matter that could take Egypt to war again is water. And then, fast forward 1988, the then Egyptian Foreign Minister Boutros Ghali, he was also the US Secretary General. He predicted that the next war in the Middle East would be fought over water, but not over politics. And then in 2010, very recently, about 10 years ago, Egypt and Sudan plotted to take military action against Ethiopia to protect these interests in the Nile. Okay? That year, WikiLeaks has exposed the communication between higher officials and the then President Mubarak, and then say that the only country that's not cooperating is Ethiopia. We are continuing a diplomatic approach. Yes, we are discussing military operation with Sudan. If it comes to a crisis, we will send a jet and bomb the dam and back to an operation, okay, and back in one day, simple as that. Or we can send a special force into the block to block it or sabotage the dam. Look back to an operation Egypt did in the late 1970s, to be specific, 1976, when Ethiopia was trying to build a large dam. We blew up the equipment while it was traveling by sea to Ethiopia. In 2013, the former President Morsi and his allies, okay, were in a meeting. They were not aware that the discussion was aired like a hot mic event. They were talking about a televised discussing about the possibility of sabotaging dam project and aiding the anti-government rebels in Ethiopia. It was broadcast for the whole world. So is it only in Nile? No. If we look at the Mekong River, it is shared by 6 countries. Again, in that place, it is the hegemon is China. China and Myanmar abstained because Myanmar is also in the upper state, in the upper course of the area. So we don't see any advantage from this agreement. So they wouldn't want to be even part of the agreement, okay? And China unilaterally built mega dam, creating hydro supremacy in the region. They are building dams after dams in the region. Okay? And they are even bullying other countries to widen the width of the river so that it would allow the transportation of big vessels going from the central part of China all the way to the China Sea. They even outsourced the dam to be constructed in the territory of other neighboring countries so that those countries are exporting power to the grid Chinese have in their own territory. Whereas those countries are taking the side effects of all this kind of construction. Okay? They reject even the 1997 United Nations Convention rules on shared water. They exactly said the way the American Attorney General had said in the past. They almost quoted him, word by word. Okay? So they do have the right to divert as much water as it wishes for its need, irrespective of the effects of downriver states. Okay, so Beijing is insisting dams will benefit the downstream because it will regulate the water, but it is already creating a lot of damage in the lower course regions of the Mekong River. Okay, so what is the solution? Unless countries are coming together, it will be very difficult to stand alone. So there are some initiatives. The 2 initiatives, the Nile Basin Initiative, NBI, and the Mekong Basin Initiative, which is MBI. When it comes to the Nile Basin, it was in 1999. Countries come together. The objective is what? To bring in socioeconomic development, equitable utilization, and benefit from the common basin resources. Okay, it was supported by the World Bank and other countries. And unfortunately, the 5, especially the upstream countries, were really disappointed because if they want to do anything, they have to get permission from Egypt, and Egypt is not willing to do that. They veto. So they were saying that they were tired of first getting permission from Egypt before using the River Nile, because that kind of agreement was made during the colonial era in 1929. Okay, those countries didn't sign. Only between Britain and Egypt and Sudan, only these 3 countries have signed. Other countries were not a party to that kind of agreement. And Egypt was reluctant. They were effectively stalling. So what is the response now? The response of Ethiopia is what? To go ahead with its own unilateral action. And then it began building the dam in 2011 against the wishes of Sudan and Egypt. And the purpose, it is called the Grand Renaissance, Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The purpose of it is what? To provide energy for domestic purpose as well as what? For exporting to the neighboring countries. And in theory, this dirt is going to help Sudan and Egypt because it will hold water in the lower evaporation area. So the water loss because of evaporation is very limited, and the chances of flooding is very much limited in the downstream. But the problem is, what if the amount of rain is reduced? If it is significantly reduced, we are not going to get water. This is what the Nile lower course areas like Egypt are worried about, okay? So, and because the Ethiopian government couldn't find any funding from international organizations like World Bank, for instance, is not providing money for a river-based project because all countries should agree to that. It has its own principle. But Egypt is always vetoing that. So because of that, the Ethiopian government decided to fund it by itself with a support from a new player, which is China. And then interestingly, no one knows what China wants at this moment because China has investments in Ethiopia, in Sudan, and also in Egypt. China wants to be a friend to all of them. At the same time, it is encouraging or supporting economically to Ethiopia to run this dam. It's very difficult to identify what their real intent is in this case. Okay? So last week, the Washington Post has made a very long article on this issue, as you can see here. And then I quote, they mentioned that President Trump was supposed to negotiate Ethiopia with Sudan and Egypt, okay? So now this article is commenting that President Trump, fashioning himself as a broker of an agreement, has taken the side of Egyptian president. What the US said is that Ethiopia shouldn't go ahead with this construction. It has to wait until Egypt is satisfied. But Egypt is not going to get happy with it. That's for sure. So because of that, there had been a certain budget, assistance to the Ethiopian government on an annual basis in the past because Ethiopia is playing a role in fighting Al-Shabaab, the anti-terrorist activity in Somalia and the neighboring country because of that. But now, to retaliate because Ethiopia has gone against the instruction or recommendation of the US government, they withheld an amount of $264 million in security and development assistance from Ethiopia. Even some non-governmental organizations are against that because there is a general sentiment that powerful nations in the upstream area, like the US, like China, are always the bad guy, and Ethiopia is found in the wrong place. So because of that, now international organizations are sympathizing with the Nile. They don't see what is the problem is in the Ethiopian highland area where there is frequent famine and drought because of scarcity of water, while the huge amount of 85% of the water is starting from the Blue Nile from Ethiopian highland, going all the way down to Egypt. Now, on the other side, in Mekong River, the Lower Mekong Initiative was also come into effect because of the US interest to go against the expansionist policy of the threat of China, okay? So because of that, it started in 2009 to enhance cooperation. In 2012, Myanmar has joined this group, and the US has continued to provide technical assistance. USGS is going there, and other government organizations are also helping. It is to make them strong and then have a stake in the Mekong River, because Mekong is going to have a very big problem because of the changes going on because of this huge dam construction in the upper stream by China. Okay? So if you look at the timeline for the Nile River, there was an incident in 1902 At that time, there was a treaty between England and Ethiopia. So the England says that, please don't stop this river. You can't completely arrest the flow. That was the agreement. Because before that time, in the old time, there were some Ethiopian kings which were threatening Egypt that we are going to block this river whenever there is some kind of disagreement, okay? So that kind of agreement in 1902. In 1929, Egypt, of course it was indirectly run by England, but Egypt as it is, and England, which is on behalf of Sudan, made an agreement which is giving a small amount of water for Sudan and a huge, disproportionately huge amount of water to Egypt, okay? Which is precluding all upper riparian countries, not consulting and not including them. In 1958-59, Sudan has complained, this amount is not fair. And then they have to revise it. At that time, both countries were not under England. But what they did was they allocate 75% to Egypt, only 25% to Sudan. Again, the upper riparian countries were not given any opportunity to participate or agree. So Aswan Dam was constructed, the highest earth dam in the world embankment. It has generated like 2.1 gigawatt, which has effectively controlled the flood. Flood used to destroy most settlements of Egypt now and then, but because of this construction, they created the largest lake, a very, very huge lake by the name Lake Nasser was created. Since then, they have regulated their water. But this area is found in a very desert, in the Sahara Desert, which is losing huge amount of water because of evaporation in that desert area. So in 1999, Nile Basin Initiative was established. In 2011, Ethiopia started building this grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, funded by Ethiopia and China. It is going to be the largest hydroelectric power generator in Africa because it is going to produce 6.45 gigawatt, which is really big. And in very few months ago, it started to fill. The first year filling has already met, the target has already met. They plan to finish it in 2023, in 3 years or so. That is what is happening in the Nile River. What about the Mekong? In 1954, many of the countries become independent, okay? So the Geneva Conference granted them the independence. Therefore, they were not talking about this river before that. Mekong Committee established in 57. In 77, Mekong Interim Mekong Committee had a problem because Cambodia couldn't participate actively. But in 1995, Cambodia readmitted into the group. And 1996, the dialogue partners, China started to at least provide data, because when are they going to release dam water? That kind of agreement. But they are not active, but they are observers in the process. And in 2009, the Lower Mekong Initiative created. And in 2020, by the way, for example, as I mentioned before, China has been building dams after dam. And in 2020, this dam has caused a huge fluctuation in river level, disrupted the natural cycle of the river. So, are we going to go against this powerful nation, powerful nations like China or powerful nations like Egypt? This is a terminology which is called counter-hydro-hegemony. So it is coined very recently, and it is an attempt to use some kind of initiatives, strategies to have a strong measure against the upstream countries to renegotiate what has been negotiated in the past. And some people say that the Ethiopian attempt is considered to be a counter-hydro-hegemony, as opposed to the hegemonic nation, which is Egypt. So some scholars are even saying this GERD, which is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, as the beginning of the end of Egyptian hydropolitical hegemony. So the people have different opinion. The same is also happening in some parts of the world. Tajikistan, for example, is a weak nation, a very weak nation in the upstream riparian, as opposed to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, stronger upstream. So, sorry, it is downstream that has to be corrected, as opposed to strong nations in the downstream area. So now they are also trying to assert their forces because things are changing. Things are changing. And in conclusion, that if a country is poor, it doesn't matter whether it is in the top of a mountain or at the bottom in the mouth of the river. It doesn't matter. The poor is always the victim of this kind of resource sharing. This is one important thing. Even global political actors are not sympathizing to the poor, as we can see. Their formula is those who are in the upland areas are bad actors, and those who are in the lowland areas are victims, the saints. That is a wrong conclusion made by many people, okay? So hydropolitics is very complex. Not all upstream riparian countries are devils, and not all downstream countries are saints, okay? So other than the physical geography, there is economic geography which can change the dynamics. There is a political geography which is changing the dynamics. So we have to look at all these things to balance the issue. Given the current and future dynamics of population, which is growing, the demand which is growing, and climate is declining, we are going to have even a very contentious debate and agreement on the rivers. We have to be even more willing to sit down and negotiate if we want to exist in these river basins. So there will be no shortcuts, or there is no magic bullet solving the problems faced by these two river basins, except engaged in a genuine basin-wide dialogue and cooperation. This is all about the presentation I have for you today, and I thank you very much. If you have any suggestion, you can use this email. And once again, thank you very much.